Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on high performance computing. Today, my guest is Greg Wall. He is from Advantech, where he's the district sales manager in the Cloud IoT group. Greg, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me on, Rich.
Well, Greg, thanks for coming on. I'm curious about this 5G topic, but let's start at the beginning. Who is Advantech and who do you help?
Yeah, and that's a question that we are trying to evangelize with the market. Advantech is a $2 billion company. We think of ourselves as a brand behind the brand. We are headquartered in Taiwan with a U.S. presence in San Jose and in Irvine, California. And really what we're trying to do is come out with white box or embedded solutions for networking applications, servers, network appliance products, UCPE products that then typically get branded and have software put on top by a OEM and then sold to the end customer.
Okay, Greg. Well, let's start with your slides, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. Sound good?
Great. So what we thought we would do is kind of talk about 5G. We think 5G really enables different paradigms in the market for the network industry, and that network industry is really driven by things in the edge and the amount of data that comes through when you get to 5G networks. And then when you look past those sort of applications and what's happening in the market, we think that there's specific things that Advantech's doing both on the software and hardware investments, and then just how what I call, or what we call, the Advantech DNA, and why we're increasingly successful and important in this market. So this is just a little bit of how we think about the 5G market. So with 5G, the interesting thing is typically when you look at the Internet of Things, there's multiple barriers to make your networks efficient. The Internet of Things is inherently limited by bandwidth. It's limited by range of where you put the sensors, either by physical location or by having to have them connected to a 3 or 4G network. And then it's also limited by the amount of bandwidth that you can upload to your networking world. And then you have huge issues with latency. When you get to 5G, those things vanish, and you're enabling tremendous step function increase in data for what you can get from your sensors in the Internet of Things world. And also your latency goes down tremendously. And then when you get both of those things together from the data that comes into the network, it enables transformation in both your cloud computing and big data, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Those things have much more data to act upon in real time. And then you can do things that you've never been able to do within a traditional network. So this is just a little bit to think about. Is these are some of the increases that we have some market reports where, and even in 2020, where we're still not, I would say, I mean, some of our phones are 5G enabled, but we really don't have that sort of market. We see average use for users. You've got some automated vehicles coming online, planes start getting connected. We at Advantech, as a manufacturer, we've spent a tremendous amount in increasing our factory access, and we are still just touching the tip of the iceberg and things that we can do, because we don't have really 5G enabling our factory today. And then just with the amount of video that you have, you continue to see this surge in data. And then with 5G, you will continue to see this increase. Plus, you have much reduced latency, so then you can offer other services. So this is just an update of kind of what we see in today's market. And Advantech, we've probably been doing most of our business in this UCPE SD-WAN segment. The SD-WAN is probably one of the services that we would have touted in 2019 that is starting to roll out. I would say 2020 has a pretty strong adoption, and certainly in the remote world we work on today, this is a big growth driver for us. And really we've seen SD-WAN drive edge services. So we have a lot of systems that are rolling out today in the edge area and are offering services for SD-WAN, but that's only one market segment. And it's certainly not really using anything mobile, with the exception of maybe some backhaul bring ups for wireless services. And that when you get 5G, all this edge access becomes dynamic and becomes transformative. And we believe that a lot of the Advantech offering really drives that change. And then in the core, we've been talking about core transformation. And with 5G, you're going to have to see this core change. And we believe that a lot of the Advantech offering will facilitate that with our ecosystem software partners. This is one that I really like. And if you look at some of these verticals that we think are going to be changed and transformed, all of these verticals require a hardware platform. Something that's been in Advantech's DNA is what really we're built like. We're then working with software partners to place their software on top of our systems. And there's a whole backdrop of things that need to happen to get software fully qualified and deployed on anybody's hardware. And we think we're uniquely positioned to fit the needs that the software vendors have. And then with our hardware and innovative software functions, we think that in these markets, there's a explosion in growth and change. We see that today, really, we've been driving industrial automation and smart retail. That's been a huge segment for us where it's growing exponentially over the last 2 years. And we think that that will continue to carry through. Broadcasting, when you have F1 drivers and you're wanting different video streaming to the end user and you're controlling all that data and offering services, the hardware and the software changes. And we think that applications like that really drive us tremendous growth for Advantech and services that we can offer consumers. This is kind of a case study and one we're really focused on here at Advantech. Traditionally, our DNA has been industrial. I would say that's where Advantech came up in the 80s and 90s in providing industrial type solutions. Now we see with 5G, we see a lot of these industrial markets coming online. And if you look at oil rigs and warehouses and construction, they typically have not been connected to the grid. I'm sure you have some sort of internet connection into a oil rig and refinery and wind farms, but you're not managing the data. You're not having multiple sensors with high available bandwidth coming through and giving you real-time data that you can then act upon. And so we think that when this happens, you get a whole paradigm shift in services you can offer. So this is an interesting case study that we've been able to deploy. So we're looking at some of the first private 5G networks. Traditionally today, these sort of solutions, you can't offer small radios in the market. So you're not having the ability to have IoT devices hooked up with 5G speeds. So you're typically connected devices that have low bandwidth. But with 5G, this comes in and we have a radio solution. The radio solution is with one of our partners, Lions, and that we're using some of the Sky-based systems. And this one, it's a Sky 8101D. It's a 1U type of appliance where we're qualifying software and deploying that platform to the market. We then have the kind of network service devices and kind of a 2U type platform. One of our Sky platforms there, and then a top of rack switch within the system. So in this application with a switch, a virtual radio, and a core, which is kind of the terminology is EPC type of services, you can offer a lot of what I would say edge type of functionality and next generation services to the market that you've not been able to do. So you can take your surveillance and you can put AI and intelligence into your network. The other one is in the mobile computing, where again, when you get the 5G, really you look at what's critical to this market. So I think the mission critical, so that really drives down latency and having security. Those two were kind of the two pieces that we haven't done a good job of in the market today. And when you have those two pieces and then having the ability to allocate bandwidth and drive quality of services, I just think that this market is primed for being revolutionized. So in this example, this is another good case study, and it kind of looks similar to the previous one. It's just that you kind of mix and match a little bit. You have a bit more redundancy here. So in this application, we look at 10 gig, 25 gig. You've got two controllers, and in this example, it's again this Sky 8101 single socket platform that's pretty unique from Advantech. We then couple that with some core services, so you've got kind of redundancy in the drive space there. And so if you look at this sort of LTE demonstrator, it's similar to what we just talked about, but we just kind of mix and match on various Advantech hardware platforms, and then we bring in different software ecosystem partners to meet these needs. And this, I think, is really why Advantech's a bit different. If you look at the platforms that you can get, and these are server type platforms, there's large competitors in this space. So why is Advantech different? When you get to a market that you need remote services and you need to be able to manage those and kind of understand like what's the status of hard drives, what's the status of my power supply. So you need to be able to access those securely in a remote setting. You also might need to upgrade your software. You need to have secure ability to do software updates. You need to be able to do BIOS. If there's a security hole, you need to be able to address that. And so Advantech has a IPMI framework that we've invested in. It's maybe 20 years old, and so it's probably got over 100 man years of investment in this platform. And this is something that we can securely deliver to our customers. And in this world, when you're getting into a private network, this sort of thing and the security of it becomes a pretty big differentiation for Advantech platforms. So that's a little bit on the software we've invested in. And then the other piece I like to talk about is on the hardware. If you look at hardware, it has to be robust. It has to meet the platform engagements that customers want. And these are kind of the other pieces, the flexibility, longevity, serviceability, kind of buzzwords that we would talk about. So what do we mean by these pieces of hardware? So on longevity, I think that's a key one, is the Advantech platforms. We design these to be in production for 5 or 7 years. And really, if you think about having people come in and port their software to our platforms, and something being turned over in 2 years becomes a problem. Reliability is one that you have needs in some areas where you have limited airflow, you have temperature ranges. And so we're coming out with solutions to meet those needs. In the telco space, you have depth issues. So you have platforms that short depth is key to some of the racks that they put in the telco side. So we've got platforms that try to get to the 20-inch rack systems. So when we look at these types of solutions, we're trying to come up with unique hardware platforms that meet the varying needs of hardware for our solution partners. And this one is really what I would say that I talk about from a sales perspective a lot. And these are maybe a bit more soft skills, but I think are key to our partners being successful. So first of all, you need to come up with a reliable platform. And on reliability side, Advantech has a DQA, so a quality test system for all of our platforms, where we have a 200 to 300 page report on all of our platforms. And so we have to go through that process to release a product, and then being able to come to a customer and say, this is all the testing that we've done. For instance, we had an application where a customer was seeing a 1 gig port, and if you plugged a PoE enabled 1 gig port into a competitor's platform, the platform would short and the ground plane would die. That's something that we test for. We test if you get PoE input coming into our 1 gig ports, and it has to function. So something like that is the quality that we design into our platforms. Flexibility is something that customers want to have um, different needs for how long something might get tested. So Advantech does a standard 4-hour burn-in, but a customer might want 8. And we have that ability to change our testing requirements based on what customers want. Part of that DNA for Advantech is that we'll put a test system that flexibly meets the customer's requirements. Zero touch provisioning. This is one that is increasingly, we're trying to offer a one-stop shop to our customers. So provide hardware, provide firmware. The hardware meets specific needs from the market. And then we load that all together, provide specific SKUs, integrate software, test it. And so then we're shipping this out to customer depots, and those depots don't need to touch the box. The box is ready to deploy as soon as they receive it. And then fixed BOMs, right, is a point where if you've got the software vendor qualifying their software on top of your hardware, and that hardware needs to go into a market that's going to be a 5-year deployment in, let's say, Coca-Cola bottling plants, there's really not an ability to have many changes to firmware or BIOS after the customer makes commitment. And if it is, it's a specific change that everybody has to be on board with. So Advantech, we really do pride ourselves that once we lock in the hardware, software, BIOS, nothing changes until the customer approves those changes. So on these 4 avenues, I think we do shine, and it is one of the ways that when we go to market with customers, we look very strong. So high quality, customizable, and no surprise changes. So that's my update. You had some questions?
Oh, absolutely, Greg. Thanks for that. The word that comes to mind after seeing this, from a business standpoint, is transformational, right? I mean,
Right.
5G. Let's step back to slide 3, because I wanted to ask you what 5G makes possible that was never possible before. What would you say?
I think the biggest thing in 5G is that we enable data from Internet of Things. So we've been talking about Internet of Things for a decade, it seems, but we still have very minimal amount of data coming from that segment. We don't have video surveillance data. We don't have managed sensors. A lot of the data is low bandwidth and low latency. And with 5G, that all changes. We have real-time access to video data, real-time access to internet sensors, I'll call them, endpoint data that is collecting large amounts of information, then we can operate on. And it's collecting them and uploading that information with real-time. It's not like a latency done after the fact. So a lot of that is something that we've never seen before. I use the analogy of planes, and when planes are in the sky, they are collecting tremendous amount of data. When these planes land, they take a hard drive out of the plane, and then they give it to Boeing or a service depot and analyze what happened on that flight. How, like, fuel efficiency, temperature information, how you were flying, that sort of thing gets analyzed like months after the actual plane trip. This enables things to happen on that plane and have it be monitored in real time.
Real time, right? Even terabytes of data, I would imagine, coming out of
Petabytes.
that. Sure.
Petabytes of
Petabytes.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Cool. Greg, let's move to slide 5 here quick. I wanted to ask you, where are your customers at today with this fixed and mobile convergence that you're showing for 5G?
Yeah, and so I think SD-WAN's a good market to kind of have a microcosm. It's probably an application that has been talked about for 3 or 4 years. If you look at an analogy of a kid, we're probably in the 1st or 2nd grade rollout of that platform. And today you have a lot of enterprise platforms, but the vast majority, 95%, are wired. There's no real LTE enablement. And the ones that are using LTE, they're just using it for backup. So when we get to 5G, that becomes how you deploy. I would say on the enterprise side, you're not necessarily hooking up wires to these platforms, especially if you have a private network and you got your own radios in your environment. And then when you get to the edge, I think that's where you haven't seen edge services because you haven't been able to get the data. So now that you can get real-time data, large amounts of it, you can process that data into the edge, and then you're rolling out all kinds of next generation services, which is what the MEC platforms enable. So pulling together mobile edge services really is something that this whole MEC movement really enables. So there's several customers that we're working with that are looking at Advantech platforms and then qualifying their services in that market. And the Sky 7K, 8K platforms will work really well in that space.
So Greg, across this spectrum, you showed some ruggedized and carrier grade type of equipment that's kind of specialized for harsh environments. How does Advantech help with that?
I think that is one of the unique differentiations of Advantech, because that's really where the Advantech started. Advantech started putting together industrial platforms that might have gone into a factory and controlled some sort of tester for barcode scanning, let's say. And as the market has rolled forward, the needs for rugged, for specific applications become apparent. So in telco, they've historically have had NEBs. You might not need NEBs today. That's a US standard, but you're seeing in a lot of these factories and a lot of these industrial areas, IP40, which is like an industrial computer grade. So it's kind of, it needs some ruggedness, but maybe not. It doesn't need to be hit by lightning and still survive. So we have lots of different platforms to try to figure out what the market segment needs. Is it IP40? Is it a box that needs to function really with limited airflow? Is it a telco platform that's in some small shed in Buenos Aires, which is getting beat by the sun and has a couple fans trying to cool that down? And how do we live in that environment? So those sort of ruggedness needs from low to high are something that we're trying to update our hardware to meet those applications. And I think that we're unique in that space.
Yeah. Well, moving on, in slide 13, you talked about the DNA, Advantech's DNA. And
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk to that in terms of the customer pain points that you're trying to fix.
I think these are all pain points that we think that we do a unique job in. I'll take number one. Is we had a customer who they were seeing a high level of failures. So they were seeing 4 to 5% of their systems fail, and it had to do with a ground plane not being grounded. And so they came to us and they said, how do you as Advantech ensure that your designs meet high quality standards? Well, having a DQA report that we go through and do testing on our devices that's very robust and detailed, and then provide it to the customer, and then have them walk through it and even say, oh, I would like this piece and this piece tested. Things like Halt and Hass is one that some customers would ask for. That just having that quality assurance in place before we engage with the customer is key. And that whole process really drives down failures and increases the longevity of the platform, and reduces headaches, right? When you're deploying things, you don't have failures. You can focus on other services and other value-added things that you as a supplier or software vendor can offer customers. Another one that I like is really this flexibility, which is number two. So some customers, they drop off their software, they give us a download of that software, and then we implement it in our system. Sometimes we'll do like a FAI that will provide them some screenshots, and that's good enough for the customer. Other customers want a full test system, and we at Advantech will offer customers the ability to put servers and switches and access to the internet into our factory. And so the customer has the ability to see what the testing is going, like what customer specified tests are happening. We can do burn-in, we can do various testings that the customer wants to see. They test for the BOM of the platform, what firmware it has, And that flexibility to really meet whatever the needs of the customer are from on the testing side, I think is just another piece of our flexibility with customers. And then zero touch provisioning is one that we see more and more of. Is these boxes, the customers don't really want to touch boxes. Software vendors want boxes to come in. They want to engage in maybe a good, better, best SKUs. And we as Advantech have to come up with, a test platform. We then lock bombs, we load their software, and then we deliver to the customer. And then the customer just ships it out from let's say a depot location in APAC and Europe and the US. But they're not really dealing with all the back end stuff that happens on the Advantech side. So when I look at it, quality, flexibility of testing, and then doing all the things that customers want to deploy systems really without them having to touch it. Those are, I'd say, the key pieces that Advantech brings to the table with customers.
Well, Greg, that's terrific. I really loved how you put this together, and I have a much better idea now about what 5G is bringing to the table. So thanks again for coming on the show today.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
All right, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on high-performance computing.